Well, good day, my friends. We are in New York City, and we are going to have a great day. Katie and I are going to go explore the history, the life of Frankie Lyman and the Teenagers. Daze with Jordan the Lion begins right now. All right, before we got this excursion started today, you said that you wanted to get a Yankees hat, and I thought, hey, what better place to get one than Yankee Stadium behind you, and also just to the left of you, Old Yankee Stadium.
Old Yankee Stadium.
So you got your
a lot of hits here.
So you got a couple of hats.
I did. I got just kind of your regular vintage one, and then cold in New York, so may as well have a Yankee stocking cap as well.
Nice. All right, let's go see the old stomping grounds of Frankie Lyman and the Teenagers.
Yep, let's do it.
Well, it all started here. This was Stitz Junior High School, and this neighborhood, this street, was where Frankie Lyman and the Teenagers began their career, their storied career. They were in fact teenagers. It wasn't just a clever name. They met here, and they used to practice here. Frankie Lyman, his apartment was the very next apartment past over here. We'll get into that in a little bit. But he was in a group called the Ermines when he was real young. I think he was 11 years old when they won the talent contest here. But he had been singing from the time he was young, and the other members of the Ermines ended up forming what became the Teenagers. After they saw Frankie Lyman here, they all started singing together, and one of the members lived right over here, and that's actually where they ended up writing the song, their hit song, Why Do Fools Fall in Love? So I found a great video of Jimmy Merchant coming back to the old stomping grounds and talking about how Sherman Garnes used to live in this building, actually in an apartment right over here, and so he used to go over there every day and would shout up to him, "Hey Sherman!" He's like, "What, man?" He's like, "Come on, man, we gotta practice, we gotta sing, gotta go make hit records." So he said that they would sing up and down this street while they were teenagers. He said that's what people did then. If they wanted to be noticed, they formed a doo-wop group and they just started singing on the streets. So he said they would sing out here, they would practice over here at Stitz. They actually were able to use that as a rehearsal spot, but he said the real magic was when he said they would be forced to go inside because of the weather. He said if it were raining or if it were too cold, they would come over to Sherman's place right here, and he said they would go in the front hallway and they would sing "Goodnight Sweetheart," and that's where they would work on their vocal stylings and work on how they would sound. And he said it was actually one of the neighbors here in the hallway would hear them and finally came out one day and said, "Hey man, don't you guys know any other songs?" They're like, "What do you want us to sing?" And he said, "Here, this is a poem by my girlfriend. Why don't you write something to this?" And so it was right here, 631. They were inside this hallway, and he said the name of the poem was "Why Do Birds Sing So Gay?" And so he said they took the words, kind of jumbled them around, and before you knew it, they had this song called "Why Do Fools Fall in Love?" And he said they wrote the song and would actually sing it on the streets. And he said within a couple of months, every kid at their school knew the song. I found video of them coming back talking about it. It was actually right here in this hall that happened. It was the apartment just to the right. That was the man that came out and gave them the poem that inspired "Why Do Fools Fall in Love?" Which I love that song. Frankie Lyman had this soprano voice that was just, for the time, was amazing. Let me tell you where they got discovered and how they got discovered. Man, I can't believe that the doors were just opened. I was able just to walk right in to see that. So cool. That's always been one of my favorite songs. I just love it. So they formed as a group in 1955, but they got discovered in 1956, and the band members would stand out here singing, and like I said, Sherman lived right up there. They would say they could remember Frankie Lymon's mom coming out here because Frankie lived right there, coming out here yelling, hollering for him, "Frankie, it's time to come in, it's 9 o'clock. Kind of crazy when you think of it in those terms, that this 11 or 12-year-old would be allowed to just be out hanging out on the streets and stuff. But his family was a little different. His parents were gospel singers, and they were in a band called the Harlem Airs, and they lived right here, and they had several children, and all the children were singers. So the dad would go perform with the Harlem Airs and would bring all the kids, all the boys, and they were a group called the Harlem Air Juniors. So he was singing, he started singing when he was 3 years old. He was in the Harlem Airs from the time that he was 7 years old, but the family needed money, and that was one way they could supplement the income with all the vocal performances. But also, Frankie had to get a job when he was 10 years old, and he actually got that job right down here at the corner grocery store. So the band said that they would often come down here to where Frankie worked, and they would just stand outside singing outside in front of the grocery store. Like I said, they were just kind of hoping to get noticed, hoping to be discovered. And they were young, but they were really good. He said everybody would always comment how good Frankie was. So Jimmy Merchant said they had 5 or 6 songs they'd always sing on this street corner, and that was the grocery store that Frankie would work at. So they would sing right there in front of that as well. But he said what they didn't know was that Richard Barrett from the Valentines lived in an apartment right above there, and he used to listen to them sing. And when he found out that they went to the junior high school, he went down to the junior high where we were just at, down to Stitz, found out about him, and would watch them rehearse. And then he went down to the studio where he recorded and told one of the producers down there about the band. Said, you got to record these guys. And he said, I can't. I don't want to get involved with the school board and having a child band or whatever. But he said, how am I supposed to tell these kids? I mean, these kids are showmen. They're performers. They want to do this for a living. How do I tell them they can't because of their age? And so he said we worked up a deal where I would work with one of his bands and he would work with the boys, and they recorded that song. They actually recorded 2 songs, one of them being Why Do Fools Fall in Love, on the first Friday in December of 1956. He said it took them pretty much all day until about 1 in the morning. And he said, and then by January, the song was on the radio and everybody at their school knew how to sing the song. So this used to be a grocery store. It is no longer. Now it's a bookshop. But yeah, it would have been right up here that Richard Barrett got the band signed. Now here's a little of the dark side. They, business-wise, got ripped off. They weren't being paid for the songwriting royalties. The people working with them took the copyright. The boys would be paid $125 a week allowance while they were out touring. They would do 90-day tours 3 times a year for that first year in 1956, even going to London. And people said they could have anything they wanted. If they were somewhere and they wanted candy or to buy something or clothes, the people around them would get them whatever they wanted. But as far as making actual money, they didn't make much. This was Frankie's building. So they went and performed in London. They did a tour in London. While they were there, Frankie was kind of a breakout. The people of London treated him better than everybody else. And the marquee started saying Frankie Lyman and the Teenagers. And without the band knowing, they took Frankie off and recorded a solo song. So when they released their next record, the B-side was actually Frankie's song, and the band threw a fit, and the label basically just said, hey, we don't need you, we don't need the group. So they made Frankie a solo act, and the vocal group said they thought it was, you know, more of like the producer and Frankie's mom that had the say in this, but that unfortunately they said what it came down to, Richard Barrett said, was, hey, it was just easier to replace a bass singer with a bass guitar. It was easier to replace some of the singers with trumpet and horn parts. In the end, instead of listening to 5 opinions on how to make a song, they only wanted to do one. Unfortunately, though, Frankie's solo career was a total flop, and at the age of 15, Frankie was introduced to heroin. And Jimmy Merchant from the band would say, their streets here in the 50s, you could get drugs very easily. Someone turned Frankie onto it at 15 and he was hooked. And with his failing solo career and his voice changing, unfortunately, by the time he was 17, he was pretty much blackballed from performing in clubs. No one wanted to record him. No one wanted to work basically with a whole new singer because he didn't have the same Frankie Lyman voice anymore. So he ended up becoming destitute. Let's go over to Frankie's grave, say goodbye to his apartment here, and I'll tell you the rest of Frankie's story. I'll tell you, it kind of blows my mind. Even though the band said like their career was very short, it only lasted, the album came out in 56 and they broke up by 57, so it was like just a year. There's nothing in this neighborhood that mentions their history. None of the streets are named after them. It's kind of crazy. Frankie didn't have a headstone for a long time, and so fans, I guess, raised the money for a headstone, but it never got put down. So eventually it was offered to this lady in New Jersey, and she didn't know what to do with it, so she just put it in her backyard. And it's been on like all these like websites. It's like a crazy thing. You can go visit this headstone to Frankie Lyman in her backyard. And she finally just decided to donate it to a museum in Michigan about a year or 2 ago. So he does have a headstone though now. There was a dispute with his 3 people claiming to be his wives, and one of his wives paid for it. Here we are. I've never been to this cemetery before. Billie Holiday is also here. We have been out here looking forever. Little word of advice: where he's pinned on Google Maps is incorrect. Katie just found him. You did it, honey. Frankie Lyman, considered the first crossover teen sensation. The group would say when they performed, there was just as many white people as black. They appealed to young and old, and Frankie had that charisma. When he was on stage, not only could he sing, he could dance. Got into some trouble though on, they're performing on a TV show, and he went out and started dancing with the crowd and was dancing with a white girl, and that kind of stirred up a little bit, but too bad what happened to the group. Very short career, that great soprano voice. Just, once it changed, they said the combination of it changing and people knowing that he was a drug addict, nobody wanted to book somebody like that back then. And what's sad, he ended up running into some trouble with the law, and it was because of the drugs. So he apparently was told he either had to go into the military or go to prison. So he opted for going in the army, and apparently would get gigs and would sneak off and do them. And one of the times he just never came back, so he would go AWOL, and eventually they dishonorably discharged him. But it was during that time in the military he got married to his wife, that Amira, that actually paid for this. For a long time, like I said, he didn't have a headstone. So the story was that after he died, the band members had basically been swindled out of the songwriting royalties. So when Diana Ross covered Why Do Fools Fall in Love, there was money coming to someone. And so the band members, or the vocal group decided to sue, and they won, but then it was reversed because they said that the statute of limitations for a stolen song is 3 years. So they ended up losing that, and what ended up happening was 3 women came out and said they were Frankie's wives. One woman, turned out they were married, but she was already married. She had never divorced her husband, so that didn't count. And then the woman in the platters came out and said that they got married in Mexico, but she couldn't produce any documents or anything, and so then it was his wife that he married while he was in the military. She ended up winning, so in the end she, I believe, gets has the rights and everything. He didn't have any kids. He had one child, one daughter, but she died almost immediately after birth, so it was just a sad story. He ended up dying. You can tell he wasn't very old. Died at the age of 25 of a heroin overdose in his grandmother's bathroom. His brother said there was always a rumor. People would always come up and say, "Hey, I heard your brother died." He said, so like the 4th time when somebody said that, he's like, "Oh yeah, that's what I heard too." And he said, "I figured I'd go over to my grandmother's place and tell her there was that rumor going around. We get a laugh about it." And he said, "I went over there and there was my dad and there was a cop, and yeah, Frankie was found there with a syringe next to him." 25 years old. He was like he gets a lot of credit for being like the first child-fronted vocal group. Yeah. So after him, we would see like Jackson 5 and stuff, but they said in his neighborhood, his brothers would say, like everybody in the neighborhood all of a sudden had a vocal group on the corner with a young boy
in front. That's
yeah,
exactly what he said. They were a dime a dozen at one point.
And he said, including himself, he said he and his brothers that used to be in the Harlem Era Juniors, they all had their own group just like Frankie did. So
if you look online, there's amazing footage of him dancing, and you can definitely see how Michael was really inspired by a lot of those dance moves. So it's very cool to see that even though he was young, his influence made ripples.
And they were a true band of the neighborhood. They had 3 African American members, 2 Puerto Rican members. It's a great performance they had. I'll show you right here where they do like a double split, and I just always thought this was so cool. And I think since we're here, we're gonna go over and visit another singer that we told you about that's buried here. It's actually a very nice headstone with her mother. Dear Mother Sadie, beloved wife Billie Holiday, known as Lady Day. Hail Mary, full of grace, it says. God, what a voice. What a beautiful voice. They did make a movie about Frankie Lyman called Why Do Fools Fall in Love, but it was not really that accurate, so it's unfortunate that his life was so short and the story was what it was, but man, the music doesn't lie. That song, those songs that they recorded were great, if only for a short amount of time. It was kind of cool to hear that when he was 13 years old and they were over in London, that everybody loved him so much he was just treated like a king for a short time in his life. Rest in peace, Frank J. Lyman. Well, my friends, we're going to call it a night. Thank you all for watching. We will see you next time. Goodbye.